I'm Staff Sergeant Andy Emmerich, and this is the snare drum. The snare drum is one of the primary non-pitched instruments of the percussion family. It's a type of membranophone, meaning you strike a membrane or a drum head to create the sound. The snare drum has two heads and a set of snares on the bottom. So here's the top head, and the bottom. And the snares run along the bottom head to create the characteristic sound. Although we don't play pitched notes on the snare drum like other instruments, we can use rolls, ornaments, and dynamics to create musical phrases. The bells, also called the glockenspiel, are an example from the pitched side of the percussion family. Plastic or metal-headed mallets are used to strike the steel bars. Here are two contrasting examples of what can be played on the bells. And that's percussion.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Musician First Class Chris DiChiara. I'm with the United States Navy Band in Washington, D.C. And today I want to talk to you about why I love playing drums and percussion. Now, there's two main reasons why. The first is that there's so many different instruments to play, and it never gets boring. It's always fun. So the second reason is that every note that you play is like a solo. Nobody else plays the notes that you're playing. If you're just starting to play, you might be given a snare drum first, or a glockenspiel or bells. This is also what you can be doing. And those are a couple reasons why I love playing drums and percussion.
This is the vibraphone. Compared to most of the rest of our percussion instruments, there's quite a bit of technology. The first is the pedal. And the pedal acts rather like a piano pedal. It sustains the sound of the instrument. If I don't use the pedal, it's rather a dry sound like this. But with the pedal, we can sustain the notes. I can use 2 mallets or 4 mallets. Occasionally composers ask for more, but 2 or 4 is the normal amount. If I use 2, this is just a melodic instrument. And with 4, of course, I can play chords. And the other piece of technology on the instrument, which I think is very interesting, is the motor. And the motor turns a series of fans. And there's a fan under each note, and underneath the fan is a resonating chamber. And the fan alternately opens and closes the resonating chamber, so you get a vibrating effect, hence the name, vibraphone. If I don't use the motor, this is the sound. But if I switch the motor on, a rather pleasing sound, I think you'll agree. This is a xylophone, probably the most recognizable of our tuned percussion instruments. The notes are made of wood, and the instrument is nearly always played with hard mallets. You'll hear that in a moment. The lowest note is down here, and the highest one is up here. This is a 4-octave instrument, probably the most common of the ranges. And the notes are arranged like a keyboard with the accidentals here and the naturals down here. It's most often used as a melodic instrument. But occasionally composers ask us to do a glissando. But one of its chief characteristics is its ability to cut through the most dense of orchestral textures. So very interesting and a very characterful sound. This is a marimba, probably the largest of our tuned percussion instruments. This particular one is 4 1/3 octaves. The highest note is here, and the lowest note is here. But there are many instruments that go even further than that, 5 octaves. Rather like the xylophone, the notes are made of wood, but unlike the xylophone, the mallets that we use are nearly always soft mallets. And the way we sustain a sound on the marimba is by rapidly doing a tremolo with the 2 sticks. And sometimes we use 4 to provide chord effects. And often the instrument is used melodically. A beautiful sounding instrument, particularly at the lower end of the instrument. At the top end of the instrument, perhaps not so resonant. The glockenspiel, or orchestral bells as it's sometimes known, is traditionally a series of metal notes from small, up here, to large. And manufacturers more recently have introduced resonators and a pedal to help sustain the notes, but always played with hard sticks compared with the vibraphone, which is soft mallets. It can be used very delicately, or more forcefully. So again, a very versatile, sometimes charming, sometimes forceful instrument, but no matter how it's played, will always cut through an orchestral texture. This is a bass drum, traditionally a military instrument and most commonly used in military circles with a pair of cymbals. But it's not only for military purposes it's been used in the 20th century. Sometimes it can sound rather more mellow and quiet. We only ever play on one side of the bass drum. The other head is as a resonating device for this playing head. And sometimes to sustain the sound we need 2 mallets. And we can create some quite interesting crescendo effects with them. Occasionally composers ask for different kinds of mallets. Here's a hard mallet, for example. And because it's quite a resonant instrument, I sometimes need to damp the head with my hand. And sometimes we're asked to play with an even harder stick. This is a hard plastic stick. So an instrument that can be quite frightening, but also really quite a strong foundation for the orchestral texture. The tam-tam had its genesis in the Far East, and it's a very simple instrument in many ways. It's a large piece of beaten metal, quite thick. This one's about 34 inches across, and we play it nearly always with a large, soft mallet like this one. I think what's interesting about the tam-tam sound is the way it develops. It actually grows after you've struck it. And we can capitalize on that by sustaining the sound with repeated strokes quite gently and create really some quite extraordinary crescendo effects. These are snare drums, sometimes called side drums, and they're called side drums because they were traditionally played at the side of the body in military circles. Along with the bass drum and the cymbals, they were used as marching instruments. But today, perhaps, we're more familiar with them as orchestral instruments or as part of a drum kit. We have three different sizes here. This is a tenor drum. That's a quite different instrument. I'll speak about that shortly. Three different sizes producing three different pitches, but all really producing the same effect. We can play with snares off in that way or with snares on. And the snare on is a different kind of a sound. It adds a different kind of crispness to the sound. Here's the snare off, and here's the snare on. And we can sustain the sound of the snare drum using the sticks, alternating them, bouncing them one to the other. Here's a roll, that's what we call it. Here's a roll with the snares off. And with the snare on. But perhaps the snare drum is most familiar in a marching type of context. Cymbals have probably the longest history in all our percussion instruments, and they're very familiar to us now as part of an orchestral section. They're very simple. They produce just a single sound, no pitch, no harmony. They can be played like that, rather loudly and with a long note, or they can be played quite quietly and quite short as well. To do that, I'm going to damp them against my body. Sometimes cymbals appear as a single instrument. The suspended cymbal, often used with a single soft stick. Sometimes with a pair of sticks to produce dramatic crescendos and diminuendos. And sometimes with a wood stick, which can be quite short and sharp, or quite long, or we can play in different parts of the instrument, on the dome, right at the edge, or somewhere in between the two. So a remarkably simple instrument, but without parallel in its effectiveness. The triangle is exactly what it says it is. It's a triangle of metal. It's open at one corner to allow the instrument to vibrate. And we can play it with quite a thick stick, rather like this, or quite a thin stick like this, or even occasionally with a wooden stick. To sustain the sound, we can do a tremolo in the top corner or maybe the side corner of the instrument like this. And I stop the sound simply by holding the instrument like this. The tambourine is really a hand drum with jingles, and even today in the Middle East, in Egypt for example, they're played like this. There, of course, they're much larger and much more ornate, but they provide the same effect, a rhythmic background to an ensemble. And the present day orchestral tambourine can be very loud indeed, or can be very quiet indeed. We can sustain the sound by shaking it. And another way we can sustain the sound is by licking our fingers to provide friction as you rub round the edge of the instrument.
Hi, my name's Andy Smith. I'm going to give you a short tour of the timpani of the orchestra. Modern timpani are written to be partly a bass instrument and partly a percussion instrument. So that as well as playing a little bit of Beethoven 5, it's the opening of the last movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which is just a rhythm on two drums. But then you get exciting things that are written for two drums, which have a completely different meaning. For example, in the Sunrise section of Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra, the timpanist, it goes bam, 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 ba-bam, and then everybody's waiting, and the timpanist goes and really has a chance to show off, and that makes the difference to the whole opening of the piece. You might want to ask how timpani work. The way the instrument tunes is a little bit like an umbrella, in that when you open and close an umbrella, just pushing one central pivot opens and closes the umbrella. In the same way, although it works in an opposite sort of way because of the tension on the bowl, the instrument actually gets tighter as you push the umbrella up and looser as you let the umbrella down. So you can actually play tunes and notes by tuning the instruments. So now I'm going to take one pair of sticks and show you how you can make a variety of sounds with just one type of stick. If you play near the edge, you get a thin but very clear sound. But you don't get a lot of tone. You get the pitch, but not a lot of tone. If you move further into the skin towards the middle, in what I call the normal playing area, you get proper sound. If I go towards the middle, then you get this. All with the same stick. Now also, if you hit the drum in a certain way and let it ring, get a nice round sound. But then if I use my other hand, I can cut the sound short by going. and you get a totally different sound. And so the variation of sound that you can get from just one pair of sticks is enormous, absolutely enormous. And it's really important to realize that when you play the timpani, you're actually playing as much with your hands as you are with the sticks.
Some important information about percussion. It involves not just drums, but many battery or striked non-pitch instruments. It also involves keyboard pitch instruments as well as timpani. Most performance opportunities include bands, orchestras, solos, and chamber music. Jazz band is more typically reserved for the drum set player. Also, that includes vibes and other Latin auxiliary percussion. Depending on what is already owned by the family, most percussionists would obtain a percussion combo kit from one of our approved local band music stores. The ideal percussion student is coordinated, organized, detailed, and responsible. They can multitask different things well. They are likely to crave order and structure when organizing personal belongings and scheduling tasks at home, like chores, projects, or homework. They are good at picking up things very fast and often able to learn certain skills or accomplish tasks on their own. They can also mimic or copy things visually very quickly. They would have a good sense of beat and can hear differences in speed or pace. They can use either their hands or their feet independent from each other, left versus right. They've had a previous background of either piano or percussion lessons with a private tutor prior to coming into band. They have a good ear and can hear close differences between high and low notes and can hum or sing on pitch fairly well. If the beginning percussionist doesn't have any equipment already at home, then they should obtain a combo kit. This would include a practice pad, a snare drum, a bell kit, drumsticks, hard mallets, and a stand that all come in a backpack case, usually with wheels. Also, depending on what equipment your school owns, this is likely to stay home just for home practice. They should have either a pair of Vibraphone 5A or ProMark SD1 drumsticks. They should own their own metronome, or have a metronome app on their electronic device such as a phone or a tablet. Either innovative ProMark, Balter, or Vic Firth pair of medium yarn mallets, which is mainly for playing on the instruments at school, and their own stick bag to keep these accessories going back and forth daily. Some things to avoid when being a beginning percussionist in band. Avoid assembling or disassembling any personal or school percussion equipment without the guidance of a teacher. Avoid not labeling your personal bag, sticks, or music clearly with your name. Avoid leaving any sticks, accessories, or music books or sheet music out that is not put away in your band classroom after class. Avoid not using a metronome consistently in your personal practice time. And avoid not willing to practice patiently a small chunk of time daily.